We're still joined in studio by our Congolese political analyst, Hubert Kabasu, and we're also joined now on Zoom by military sociologist, Professor Lindy Heinecken, as well as defense analyst, Kobus Marais. Kobus and Lindy, a very good evening to you, and thank you so much for joining us. And of course, thank you, Hubert, for staying with us throughout
good evening from my side.
The evening. A very good evening to you too. So we heard a number of sentiments by different speakers, and one that really stood out in my colleague Naledi Mulao, they're stressing the issue of politicizing this mission. I mean, the Army General, the Chief Army General speaking there, saying that if peace and stability is what our fallen heroes were pursuing, it begs the question as South Africans that we rally around and support families to remember the fallen heroes. And he went on to speak about whether we should be debating the issue of funding of the SANDF, and we should not move around politicizing this matter and saying the Defence Force could have done better. Our people were armed and had the necessary means to fight. We have capabilities that are equal to the task. Kobus, maybe I could start with you here just to speak about, is this really not a good time for us to be dissecting all of these issues and truly looking into, we know that 3,000 of our troops still remain in the DRC, and whether or not we should be looking at what improvements could be done in order to ensure their safety?
Well, first of all, obviously, it is a somber evening. It was a somber evening, and we must pay respect to our soldiers. But we have never had any problems with honoring our soldiers. We believe our soldiers have done a fantastic work under extremely difficult conditions. And while we're doing that, there's never a better moment than now to talk about those things that led and contributed to this embarrassment that we've had in the DRC and that we are still experiencing in the DRC. One must remember those soldiers in Sake and in Goma are still outgunned, outnumbered, and surrounded by the M23s. So they are still dependent on the M23s to allow them to get water, to get food, to get medicine, to get any other thing. They were forced to lay down their weapons. So they are still in a dire situation, a situation that they should never, ever have been. Had the leaders of the Defence Force and the politicians in government responsible for the Defence Force, had they listened to rational and logic voices to say, be aware, be cautious. Even there were leaders from the Defence Force who has warned against this. And I've listened tonight, the chief of the SANDF and the president has referred to those retired generals and those serving in the Defence Force still. Well, were they right or were they wrong? They were right. And I've said the other day to one of the deputy ministers, I hated to confess that what I've warned about for a number of years has played out exactly and even worse than those warnings were all about. So we have to talk about that because it's now fresh in the memories of government. It should be fresh in the memories of the National Treasury and the Minister of Finance, who must allocate the funds to the Defence Force. So there's never been a better time than now to start talking about it.
We'll continue with this discussion in studio, and I really want to bring in our military sociologist, Professor Lindy Heinecken. Prof, Kobus spoke a little earlier on saying that the situation that the troops who continue to be in the DRC is one that they shouldn't have been in the first place. But we're also hearing the chair of the steering committee saying that the Joint Standing Committee in Parliament are united in calling for more resources for the Defence Force. I just want you to speak to us from a military sociologist perspective with regards to the general public perception, especially with the situation and how it's unfolded. Do you think it influences in any way the recruitment and possibly the future support for other missions?
Well, I think for the first time now, we are having a lively debate about defence, which has been virtually absent within the public domain for a very long time. And whenever an incident like this occurs in terms of the public, the first thing the public will ask, if they don't understand what the roles and functions of the Defence Force is, and they don't. The majority of South African citizens really don't know what the Defence Force is up to and doing. is to ask the question, what are they doing? What are they doing there? So that needs to be really clearly explained. The other thing is that if you are going to deploy your forces and you've got a very clear mandate, then you must make sure that they've got the resources to match their objectives. So this, if we're going to leave our soldiers there, then you know, we have to consider whether we are able to get them their resources. Then to answer your question, it does, if one looks at recruitment worldwide, you see that society is becoming increasingly risk adverse, and many countries face recruitment problems. I don't think in South Africa we're necessarily going to have a recruitment problem because of the high unemployment. So the military is an employer. It's not necessarily the employer of choice. It's often the employer of last resort. And we need to take that into consideration when we are seeing people coming back in body bags and the impact this is actually going to have going forward.
I mean, Kobus, we heard there the chair of defense coming in also saying that the army is not the first line of peacekeeping and that conversations and dialogue needs to continue, and robust conversations need to happen between leaders across the globe and across the continent as well. Just given the current geopolitical climate, what do you think are the implications of this incident for future peacekeeping missions as well as military cooperation within the SADC region?
Well, I personally think it has seen a setback. Remember when we were part of the MONUSCO forces, there was also a force intervention brigade, but this was to a large extent the SAMI DRC was the more, let's call it chaotic deployment. It's the most soldiers that we have lost in one day since Bengawi. So it is, things is not running as smooth as it should be. And it's certainly damaging the image of South Africa. At one stage, we were by far the best in the African continent. Now they're talking about us as being the third largest defense force in Africa. We must also remember that the predicament that we sit in back in South Africa, where we've got porous land borders, we've got no reconnaissance and patrols and protection on our maritime terrain, and our airspace has got no protection. So, and we sit with a dwindling defense budget. It's now 0.7% of GDP. It is not sustainable at all. We know that our technology is old and outdated compared to our adversaries who are working with the best and the latest and the newest technology. Even the M23s had much superior firepower and technology than we had. So without air support in the DRC, in any deployment, and without air firepower, we are just sitting ducks. And that is a situation where our soldiers are in now, in the DRC. There's no ways that we can get them out other by negotiating with the M23s. One must also remember that the ceasefire that everybody is talking about now, which is a good thing. However, that was unilaterally decided by the M23s. It was not a bilateral an agreement between parties or a multilateral agreement between parties. So it is the group that has got the initiative currently in the Eastern DRC is the M23 supported by the Rwandan army and the Rwandan government. So we have to sit back and say, what are we doing there? That is not our war. It is an East African community situation that must be resolved, supported by the African Union and also the United Nations. Yes, now for the first time, the Angolan president is becoming involved. They are the immediate SADC neighbors of the DRC, and they are not even involved in that so-called peace enforcement missions. Neither is Zambia, who's also an immediate neighbor. We are the most further south of all the SADC members, and there's about 5-6 SADC countries between us and the DRC as buffers. So our national integrity is not at stake. It is not under threat. And we must really ask ourselves now that it seems like Malawi doesn't want to fight anymore, and Tanzania as well. And we know that the bad situation of the DRC army is in. What are we doing there? Whose battle are we fighting? Why are we sacrificing the lives of our soldiers? It is just not fair on our defense force. Remember, a large chunk of the expenses currently in the DRC must come, it is unbudgeted for, it is unprovided for, and it must come from the bottom line of the dwindling defense force budget as well. It means, again, stealing from Peter to pay Paul, and that was just going to exacerbate the dilemma, financial dilemma and resource dilemma that the Defence Force is sitting in. We should upgrade our RX helicopters. We should upgrade our Roy Falk helicopters and deploy them. My position is whenever you deploy soldiers, doesn't matter where, you have to resource them 100%. Financially, equipment, the best equipment, there is no debate about that.
Right.
And if you cannot do that, you cannot really protect the lives of your soldiers. And in that case, they must stay home until we are in such a position that we can play Father Christmas for the rest. We have to start at home and making sure our own borders and our own country is safe from intruders. And we know that is not the case at the moment.
So, I mean, Hubert, Kobus says that this is not our fight to fight. The president says we have fulfilled the mission of bringing back home our soldiers. We must fulfill our duty in finishing this mission. Is there still value in keeping our troops in the DRC?
Look, at the current context, military context, South Africa is not going to have any added value in terms of security, peace, and stabilizing the area. Because, first of all, I think the whole process deployment of South African Defence Force there, yes, it was a noble mission, but in terms of the political assessment and the analysis of the military risk, I think the process was flawed. Because the South African Defence Force right now is in a sustainable and untenable situation right now. Because the Congolese army itself is in complete disarray. I mean, the president abandoned the soldiers there. They were even in a worse situation than South African soldiers. Actually, they were going to beg from South African soldiers. And currently, M23, I have said M23, have recruited them. They even sent a message saying the president abandoned us. The Congolese president actually is right now in Munich attending some conference. When Goma was captured, he was attending or watching some soccer event in Qatar. So, and the mercenaries also, they ran away, they were worthless. So South African Defence Force has no added value whatsoever at the present moment. There's nothing they're going to do. They're sitting there encircled by M23s. And in addition, you have to consider that South Africa is intervening only in one fragment of the puzzle, because it's not only M23, which is actually IFC M23. Now they consider themselves not as rebels, but as constitutional revolutionaries, because they say they base their operations on Article 64 of the Congolese Constitution. No, so in that area, you don't have only M23. You have like 100 militias. You have Ugandan ADF NALU, who are killing people in dozens every single day. You have Codeco toward Ituri. They are also butchering people there. So the totality of the situation requires that the epicenter, the primary causal factor of this military disarray, which is erratic politics, predatory governance, re-autocratization of the Congo, that is the issue that must be tackled by these African presidents. I mean, SADC, it's all good to say, well, peace is a noble mission. It's premised on the principles of African Union, SADC, etc. But the fundamental principles of SADC pertaining to good governance, peer review mechanisms, etc., prescribe proactive leadership to tackle political issues of governance, National Defence Force governance, etc. So if our president, be it in SADC or AU or or EAC, they are not capable of deploying this proactive leadership to engage their peers in our countries. So our militaries will be just ambulance chasers. And in the case of South African soldiers right now, they're in a context where their contribution will not have any impact whatsoever, because not only the militias there, but you have also these people who committed genocide in Rwanda, who are associated with the Congolese army. So the people fighting there consider that South African soldiers are in the same group or associated with the Congolese army, and then by transitivity, they associate with these genocidal militias. So it's a tricky situation which should have been understood prior to deploying them there.
But speaking of the tricky situation, I mean, the Chair of Defense, Mr. Malusi Kigaba, says the South African Defense Force troops that are there are capable of defending themselves.
No,
they waged a 9-hour battle.
Unfortunately, I think he doesn't have all the parameters. He speaks from the parliament. He doesn't understand what is. They are surrounded. There is no support, backup that they come there by air. They've got only the lake or going toward Rwanda. Yet Rwanda considers that South African Defense Force or soldiers are in an offensive posture because Rwanda also sees this predicament in terms of how Congolese soldiers associate with people who committed genocide in Rwanda, and the mercenaries, and they're in the same group with South African soldiers. So Rwanda sees South African soldiers as hostile force. So there's no way they're going to add value. They could have done so if, for example, as Kobus has indicated, if they had like air support. Yet the 3 Royal Folk helicopters that were there were returned to South Africa in December. So there's no backup whatsoever possible that can be deployed to help them right now. They logically and rationally should be withdrawn and sent back to South Africa. Because, look, now we're talking about this debate for Africa and for South Africa. Remember that in Bangui, South African soldiers died, like 14 of them died there. So it's a recurrent sort of tragedy, and we have to think about it in terms of saying, how does South Africa actually deploy its diplomacy in terms of the so-called peer review mechanism, African Renaissance, to ascertain that leaders in the region, presidents in the region, manage defense governance properly.
Kobus, I mean, Hubert is saying that our troops should be withdrawn immediately, knowing what we know, given the resources that we have, the situation that these 3,000 troops find themselves in, basically under siege. Do you think this will be another difficult task in order for us to bring our troops back home?
I think it will be a difficult task, and I think it will really ask maturity on the side of political leaders. I have held the position for a very, very long time that the solution is not through the barrel of a gun, but around the discussion and negotiating table. And I've held the position that it is not the role and the responsibility of South Africa to try to play that statesman. I think our president has lost that initiative totally. I think it's, as I've said, it's East African community. Because remember, all of those countries bordering to the east of the DRC are East African community countries. Only 1 or 2 of them might be also SADC members, but they are all African Union members. So that's where it should be resolved. South Africa's got no position. Remember, there's also the other rebel group that is fighting basically on the side of the Congolese forces, and is seen by the M23s that South Africa is actually fighting with them, alongside them. Even if that is just a perception, it might be wrong, the FDLR. But that perception put us into a situation where there's no ways out. The best that we can do, especially now that it seems like the Goma airport runway has been repaired, that we must negotiate with M23s with the help of Rwanda to at least allow our soldiers to be repatriated from Goma airport. Remember where the others are sitting now, the extra soldiers and equipment in Lubumbashi. That is just way too far out. You can't even do airlift from there towards Lubumbashi.
Right.
It is not practical. So the best that we can do is, be not egoistic, acknowledge the severity of the situation, and sit and ask their help. Even, hopefully it will not be the case, but even if that means that we have to leave some or all of our equipment behind, there cannot be a price cannot be put on the lives of our soldiers, and they are encircled.
Right.
And they are encircled. They are not safe at the moment. Anybody who's saying that is not talking the truth.
Prof. Heinecken, I want to give you the last word here tonight, and I just want you to talk to us about what lessons can be drawn from this situation, especially just regarding the organization and the execution of peacekeeping operations in conflict zones.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's many lessons to be learned here in terms of when one goes into a mission like this and you are deploying as part of another force, not to deploy alongside a force that is already lacking in legitimacy, because that's going to tarnish your image as well. And this is what's happened here. So that is a one level. But I would like to just come back to something which has been the key focus of today, and which is the military families. And, one of the things, the well-being of a family is essential for the optimal functioning of military members. And it really does concern me that it's only now that there is this focus on the military families. And what I know from my own research is that the military members go through resilience training. But military families that are staying here, are in South Africa, knowing that their loved ones are still over there, never mind those that have just lost their loved ones, are not really equipped and prepared to deal with the complexities of these type of peacekeeping operations and the impact that it has both on the soldiers and on them coming back. And one of the things that concerns me is I've been reading reports that those deployed that died in the Central African Republic have still not been fully compensated for the loss of the soldiers over there. So the journey that the military families are facing back home now is not just dealing with their grief, but now having to get the necessary support to navigate through the military bureaucracy to be able to get the pension benefits and compensation for their lost ones. So, I think it also brings into focus the real importance to invest in the military families as well when we are deploying soldiers, both in terms of the welfare of the soldier deployed and the stress that it evokes in them, but also to have the necessary support for the military families that are affected by these deployments.
Right, Prof. Heinecken raising a very important point there. But thank you to all our guests for tonight. Mr. Hubert Kabasu, thank you for staying with us throughout this evening, as well as military sociologist Prof. Lindy Heinecken, as well as military defense expert Mr. Kobus Marais. Thank you all for your time this evening.